Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this professional development learning opportunity. I'm Jessica Roberts from NCEA, and I will be facilitating the webinar today. Just a few housekeeping notes as people are joining. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to use the chat or Q&A windows. We will be monitoring the questions and we'll try to answer all of them in the allotted time. Within 24 hours of today's webinar, I will email everyone a link of the recording as well as the online survey. Once you complete the survey, you will receive a certificate of participation for the webinar. Today's webinar, O Antiphons, an inspiring musical alternative to your Advent concert or lessons and carols, is presented by Mr. Rick. Oh, and your last name got cut off, Rick. I'm so
It's
sorry.
okay.
What is your last name?
It's Rick Gabrillo. Gabrillo with a G.
Thank you. It's just one of those things. It got cut off on my list.
That's
Thank you
okay.
so much, Rick, for joining us today. We really appreciate you being on the webinar with NCEA.
Of course. And Jessica, let me just ask one quick question. For the screen share, should I be off of that in order for them to see me, or all good to go?
Everybody should be able to see you right
Perfect.
now, so you are all good to go there. And I will let you go ahead and lead us
Okay,
in prayer and get started.
absolutely. Well, welcome everybody. Let's begin with the prayer here. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Bless, O Lord, us thy servants who minister in thy temple. Grant that what we sing with our lips may believe in our hearts, and what we believe in our hearts we may show forth in our lives through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Father, Son, Spirit. Amen. Well, everyone, thank you for joining me today. And I would love to get to know who you are a little bit better. So in today's presentation, as you're working through the webinar, if you wouldn't mind in the chat to list your name and your parish or your school and the grades and ages you work with, I'd love to be able to know a little bit more about you. And as well, it helps me know how to gear some of my webinar towards you.
It does look like our chat settings might be disabled right now, so I'm going to work on
Ah,
that, but the Q&A setting is available. So thank you to
okay.
those that have pointed that out, and feel free to drop any questions there, and I will work on that, Rick.
Okay, no worries. Thank you, Jessica. Well, I am very excited to do my first webinar here with AFPC and NCEA. It's just exciting to be able to share my journey and let you know a bit more about what I've done here in Austin, Texas. So let me first start with a little bit about me, so you know who's talking into the camera here. I have about 25 years as an educator in private, public, and parochial schools throughout the Austin area. My training was in the New England area to start at the New England Conservatory in Boston University. And then I made my way back to Austin, and here's where I have stayed in Texas. I have my undergraduate in music education and my master's degree in choral conducting. I have directed choirs all throughout the United States. I've done presentations and publications for TMEA, Texas Music Educators Association, and ACDA, American Choral Directors Association. I've conducted my choirs at the conventions. I've brought my choirs and my church choirs on tour across the pond. I'm also a professional singer. My main work is with Conspirare. Maybe some of you have heard of it. We are a Grammy-winning ensemble. We've been nominated quite a few times. I've been to the Grammys a couple of times. It's very exciting. And a lot of actually this presentation today is going to be based on the work of Conspirare, so that you, and we'll talk a little bit more about that so you know the kind of things that we do in Conspirare and why it was an inspiration for today's webinar. In terms of my church work, in addition to a lot of different faith backgrounds, Presbyterian, I've been working with Catholic churches. Of course, my home parish is Catholic, but I have worked in different churches since I graduated from my master's degree. And my last big stint is as director of sacred music at St. Louis Catholic Church in North Austin. I have 17 years there. I started off as a college singer, and then I was director of choirs about 14 years ago. And then over the last 8 years, I was director of sacred music. I have switched out of it just recently to get some new experiences, but it'll never leave me, those experiences with the church. And so I'm glad to share them with you today. Talking about St. Louis so you know a little bit more about it. It is a large North Austin urban parish. We have about a little over 5,000 families that are active. We have a school, a pre-K through 8th grade, that has about 150 students each year. Our weekend schedule is pretty full. We have, of course, our daily masses throughout the week, as well as 7 weekend masses, 4 in English, 3 in Spanish, and then a Sunday Vespers. And those of you who might have a similar schedule, maybe like me, and had 13-hour days on Sunday. And actually during COVID, which was an interesting time because we were just about to hire a new organist, and didn't happen. So I, as a keyboardist, got the job of being the organist as well. And so I was doing single duty for everything. And it was quite a run there. But at St. Louis, we do have a group of cantors that work for vigil and weddings and funerals. King's Choir, which is our traditional choir. That's the one that I conducted. The Cecilia Singers, which is a contemporary group. 2 Spanish groups, Coro Nueva Alianza and Coro Emmanuel. And then the St. Louis Children's Choir. And then a Vespers Choir. And then finally, the King's Concert Series, which is a series of concerts where we bring in not only musicians from the parish that are of a professional level, but also outside of the church. And we really try and create beauty for our church community that they may not normally be able to hear just if they come to weekend masses and whatnot. So St. Louis is quite a busy place, and this O Antiphons concert was born out of this desire to feed this community in a different way. So, big question. I was an educator for a long time, starting in middle school, back in 1999, believe it or not, that's how old I am. But I always would have a question when I would come to these kinds of things. The idea being, what's the point today? What am I going to learn? What can I do differently after this session? And I remember that I would have my notepad and I was just waiting for the person to tell me, this is how you should do this. This is how you should conduct this song. This is the music you should pick. This is the tried and true things that we do to be better teachers. And while I have given workshops like that, this is actually kind of not that type of workshop. I'm going to appeal to something just a little differently. And the idea is about appealing to, for those of you, especially who have been in the field as long as I have, you remember that, and if you're a new teacher or a new director, you're gonna know exactly what I'm talking about, which is you're super excited to enter the field. You're excited to work with your kids. You're excited to get into your first church choir position because everyone's gonna be loving every hymn you pick. All the kids are gonna sit up when you walk into the room, and they're gonna sing every note correctly. You're gonna be able to do that Palestrina motet you wanted to do, for Advent, and you're so super excited. And there are those rare unicorns that I think in teaching or directing that for them it all kind of works out, and they just no problems, and they just love it and they keep on going. Now, if you're not one of the rare unicorns and you're like me, it didn't quite go that way. And when I started teaching in middle school, it was rough. It was rough going, and the kids weren't inspired, and the kids weren't ready to tackle everything that I wanted them to tackle. And so what you enter for me is that you enter a survival mode, and you start looking for things that can work. So you look for anyone that has an answer for you. Tell me what to do. I need to know how to work with my kids. What pieces should I pick? And you're in sometimes. And my first year, I was kind of desperate. I was actually going to quit teaching, and it's kind of an amazing little story. But I stuck it out, and 6 years later, I was Teacher of the Year for my school. I was a middle school Austin ISD finalist for middle school. It was exciting. I had learned some things. But what I want to get back to with church music is that, and the same idea when you're a church director for your first year, you're desperate. You're like, and the liturgies keep coming, and you are just struggling to get through a whole year. And then you start realizing that there's actually comfort and safety in the liturgical cycle. So you have A, and then B is kind of like A, but you sort of have to change some things for the readings. You get to C, you're feeling more comfortable. And then you get back to A again, you're like, oh, thank goodness, and you pull out your A, and maybe you change a few things. But for me, after you've done a few cycles, I was already going into my 6th cycle of ABC, I believe. And somewhere in the middle, after you sort of done a few cycles, you not only do you rely on the formula, you rely on the formula to allow you work-life balance. So you're like, let's just do that motet from before, or let's pick that piece we did for the last concert a couple of years ago. But what happened, I found for myself, was that after a time, I also stopped being creative, and I stopped thinking, what could I do differently to be inspiring? Because it started to become that my job was kept by safety in the lectionary cycle. And so about, well, actually, before I do that, let me just do one real thing, okay? So some ground rules about today, right? So that's getting into my story. But here's what I promise you today that I will not be doing, okay? I will not be telling you that something you are doing is wrong or that you could do something better. And I will not say that you can improve if you just follow the wisdom that I impart upon you, because I'm just sharing my part of the journey with you. And here are the things that I hope will happen today. That I hope that something I share with you will foster curiosity back into the work that you do. This is a tricky time because we're all at the end of the year and our stores are super low. But I'm hoping that today is something that can be a breath of air for your next year. I hope that something I share today will foster reflection about your own work. And I hope that something I share today kindles a burning spark of courage that allows you to do something you've never done before. Nothing in the ABC cycle, nothing that you've done at a past concert, and that you actually challenge yourself to maybe be creative. The inspiration for what I hope today comes from Papa Francis here. And he said in his festival, The Social Doctrine of the Church, and when he was talking about what was happening at that festival, he said, boldness, hope, creativity, and courage are not synonymous, but represent a connection of intentions, virtues, openness, and views of reality that strengthen the human soul. And when we remain closed in on ourselves with the sole objective of preserving what exists, we are losers in the eyes of the gospel. So boldness, hope, creativity, and courage. That's actually what got me into teaching. And it's also what kind of died first in my early years of teaching, because I was just learning how to survive. And so as I got more experience, got to become a better teacher, better church director, these ideas of boldness, hope, creativity, and courage are what made my back half of my time, when I'm more of a seasoned director, seasoned teacher, much more exciting, and got me thinking again as a musician. So this presentation was about comparing Advent lessons and carols and O Antiphons. And I want to just say now, and I'm going to say it again a few times, that O Antiphons is not a form. It's not something I follow structurally. It's really a creative endeavor. And so I want you to hold on to that. But if you've never done an Advent lessons and carols, it's actually a beautiful way to bring your church, your students, into the Advent season. And there is a more structural, traditional form for this, with a prelude, an introit, an opening hymn or processional. Then there's a bidding prayer, then the Lord's Prayer, and then you start your cycle of lessons and anthems, which are typically prescribed readings for each lesson, followed by an anthem that would correspond with the lesson. Then there's a prayer, blessing, a closing hymn, and a postlude. And you don't have to, it's so varied in terms of how you do lessons and carols. You don't have to do all 9, you could do 5. I actually would use this list was from the St. James Music Press, but frankly, you can find this list anywhere, and actually you can see the prescriptions for readings. So if you're trying something new, if your creativity is about, let's just try something different, the Advent lessons and carols are a wonderful way to unify your church community and your school community through something different. So I encourage you to give it a try. Okay, so that's the Advent lessons and carols. Now, O Antiphons. What is this mysterious O Antiphons? Some of you may know the great O Antiphons already, and if you do, then just hang on to that thought. So about 8 years ago, Very Reverend James Misko, who is now the Vicar General of the Austin Diocese. He was the pastor at my parish. He was my second pastor I worked for. I've worked for 4 pastors. And he was a big fan of Conspirare. And if you don't know Conspirare, we are in our 29th season. We're Grammy Award winning, multiple nominations, and we bring in singers from around the nation to sing together in concerts throughout the year, and then we tour throughout the nation. But Father James had gone to one of our Conspirare Christmas concerts, which our director, Craig Howard-Johnson, uses something called a collage style. It's not anything that he invented per se, but it is something that he used pretty regularly that was really unique for him and for the choral world. And what that collage style, it's more a creative process than it is a form. So if you went to music school and you learn about fugues, you learn that fugues aren't forms, but fugues are a way of composing counterpoint. Same idea here. It's not a form. It's not like you do this and this and now you have a collage. And it's an expansion on partner song idea. So if you work with little kids, you know how 2 songs can go together because they share a same harmonic or melodic frame. Same idea here, except it's like partner song idea on steroids, because not only are you thinking about music that can go together, that melodic and poetic themes that are integrated for continuity and meaning in a song or a section of a program, but it can actually even be larger arcs. And so what Craig would do oftentimes and does is that he'll pick some kind of song that actually follows through the whole hour-and-a-half concert and comes back in fragments. In many ways, he was actually very inspired by the work of Bach. It's one of his favorite, he's one of the favorite composers of his. And so in a lot of Bach's larger works, this collage style actually harkens back to the idea of a cantus firmus being used throughout a program. So what I want to look at first is going to be the Conspirare Christmas concert, which Jess is going to help me with in just a second. But what I wanted to do is show you programs so you understand what's going to be happening. Okay, so collage style is music that's kind of integrated. And so what we're going to watch is the first opening, the entrance for about 4 minutes or so. Now, here's one of the interesting things you got to kind of keep open-minded about, okay, which is the kind of music that's being used in a Christmas concert. One of the things that Craig always says is one of his joys is to debunk musical snobbery. It's a fun little catchphrase, but in the church world, it's very real. And I myself I'm guilty to it. Oh, I don't like that hymn, like that motet. I want to do that contemporary song. It's just not written well. And I remember once we were doing, I was wanting to really not do this one hymn for funerals. That is a very favorite 1980s hymn that people love. And I was like, it's not really that well written. The words are so good. It's just kind of sweet, and I don't know. And when you go online and you actually look up this hymn, it's the same idea. People, all the organists in the world are, no, I take that off my list. But my mind changed when I had someone come up to me and they were asking about this hymn, and I said, "Is there something? Can I steer you towards, one of these that might be?" And they said, when I was a little child, when I was like 9, he said, my grandmother, who I was very dear to, that was the hymn that they played at her funeral. And he started crying. And it just made me realize, it just took me down a notch where I thought, I hold on so much to music that I think is better for the kids and better for my congregation. And I forget that music speaks to people in ways that we oftentimes cannot perceive. And so when we start holding on to frameworks of this song is not good enough, doesn't make the mark, you can oftentimes close people out of the experience. And I really think that's important to always reconsider. Yes, we can create rubrics of better music than others, of course, but just in your own mind, in your own teaching, try not to shut down completely and just close things away. So this excerpt we're going to see, I'm showing you, and can you see that screen, Jessica? Can everyone see that? Great. So he actually starts with a Stevie Nicks song for a Christmas concert. It's just like the white-winged dove sings a song. It sounds like she's singing. And then a few woo babies. And I know, hang on, try not to be disbelievers just yet. It sounds like she's singing. And then he integrates our singing the Veni Veni Emmanuel chant. So the men will sing the Veni Veni Emmanuel chant in Latin. And underneath this is a musical bed that actually works with both songs. So again, the partner song idea. And then he brings back the alternating verse of the second verse of Stevie Nicks. Well, then suddenly there was no one left standing in the hall in a flood of tears that no one really ever heard fall at all. And when I went searching for an answer up the stairs and down the hall, not to find an answer, just to hear the call of a night bird singing. And then he comes back to the O Come, O Come Emmanuel in English, O come thou day spring from on high. And then we finish off that phrase. And then what he ends that section with is this Rumi poem. No more words, in the name of this place we drink in with our breathing. Stay quiet like a flower so the night birds will start singing. So that's a lot. For Craig, he actually loves the O Antiphons idea. And so this beginning is all about waiting. It's all about something missing in our lives. When you see that second verse of the Stevie Nicks song, you went up the stairs and down the hall and you couldn't find an answer, and you just wanted to hear the call of the night bird singing. We just want to hear something that evokes beauty. We're waiting for it. We're searching for it, which is the theme of Advent, is we are seeking and waiting for our Messiah to come through this emptiness, this empty hall. So if you weren't, if I could convince you a little bit, Stevie Nicks is not so far off from what could be part of a Christmas concert when you're looking at it from that perspective. I will say for this series, which started almost 20 years ago, we now can fill out multiple 1,500 member audiences, full sold out capacity in San Antonio and Austin over about a 5-day run. So it's interesting, but a lot of this has really grown in the hearts of our city and our audience. The excerpt that we are going to hear is going to go on a little further. And one thing that for Craig, he is very touched by, and the way that why this is creative is that he is moved by what's happening sometimes in the world around us. And so he actually makes a nod to deep in the heart of Texas. At this point, at that time of the year, Texas was having some really interesting legislation and happening and struggles. And just so he was wanting to evoke the idea of a Texas that was more at peace. There was some violence happening, gun violence. So he pulls that in. And then he pulls in from Oliver, where is love? And does it fall from the skies above? And he interpolates that. Again, the idea of seeking love, waiting for the Messiah. So Jess is going to play this excerpt, and we're going to take a listen for about 4 minutes and just listen to this portion of the entrance.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit play. Rick, go ahead and let me know when you're ready to pause again, okay?
Okay.
No more words. In the name of this place we drink in with our breathing, stay quiet like a flower so the night birds will start singing. Does it fall from skies above? Deep in the heart of Texas, the prairie sky is wide and high. Deep in the heart of Texas, the sage in bloom is like perfume. Is it underneath the willow tree that I've been dreaming of? Deep in the heart reminds me of the one I love. Deep in the heart of Texas, who can say where she may hide? Must I travel far and wide?
Just gonna stop there. Okay, so now you can see just a little bit of inspiration about what Father James was listening to. He really was looking around in the audience and seeing how people were just connected to all these different types of music and styles of music that really spoke to him. So now, how does that relate to O Antiphons? So about 8 years ago, he comes up to me and he says, "Rick, you sing in Conspirare, you've been singing with them a long time." He said, I want you to create something like that for us." And he said, I want your theme to be about the O Antiphon. Okay, so I knew about them in a very cursory way from O Come, O Come, Emmanuel. And if you know of course, everyone knows the O Come, O Come, Emmanuel hymn, but the verses of the O Come, O Come, Emmanuel are drawn from the O Antiphons. So first of all, what are the O Antiphons? So this is what I have in, we've been doing O Antiphons for about 7-8 years now, I think. And this is the forward that's in the beginning of each of the programs. And the Roman Church has been singing the O Antiphons since at least the 8th century. They are the antiphons that accompany the Magnificat canticle of evening prayer, with one prescribed antiphon each day from December 17th to the 23rd. They are a magnificent theology that uses ancient biblical imagery drawn from the messianic hopes of the Old Testament to proclaim the coming Christ as the fulfillment not only of Old Testament hopes, but present ones as well. The repeated use of the imperative "come" embodies the longing of all for the divine Messiah. And you can see on the right side of the screen are the different verses of the O Antiphons in English that are written out. And so I after studying and living with them and then learning the chants, I was sort of challenged about how to incorporate them into a program that also did something that affected it, not just a present and sing, like lessons and carols is. Lesson, anthem, lesson, motet. but actually how to make something a little different for people to enter into it. So funny enough, I have two children, and I'm going to use them as a metaphor for this next section. And the fact is, I've been doing O Antiphons for about 8 years, yet there's only one video that exists online. And that is because with my first child, Ryan, the metaphor is that if you have multiple kids, you know that you take pictures of that first kid, and there's just every day, I'm going to keep the first poopy diaper, I'm going to save it, I'm going to keep everything, pictures everywhere. And then you go through parenthood, you get to the second kid, and you're lucky because you're lucky if you have a picture that doesn't go from birth to 5 years old, which with Lillian, we were a little better than that, but she definitely doesn't have as many photo books as Ryan. So that being said, it's so funny. I was looking through examples to share with you of videos, and I realized it was just enough for those of you who are alone in your school or church. You know how this works. I only have one example online of an O Antiphons. And so this one actually came from 2020. We've been doing it a while. And of course, those of you remember 2020 was the start of COVID. And so something that you should know, because this is a creative process, there's not a form. It's something I put together every year. The color of it was a little bit darker, and there's a little bit more a feeling of isolation. So this is what I wrote in the foreword. This year has been unlike any in our lifetimes. It seems over the past month, we've encountered so many intense experiences. It was at this time that our faith had to become an anchor to hold us firm. Prayer, stillness, and meditation. Looking ahead, you can read this for yourself, but that through these poems, through these words, we try to connect back to our source and our creator. And it was an offering at that time on these sonnets that were written by Malcolm, and also the words of the O Antiphons and the hymns to be a time of solace for people in COVID time. So the way that what we're going to actually focus on, this is actually the program of O Antiphons that I picked that year. It never looks the same. Okay? So again, creative process, which keeps it exciting. And if you're ready for the challenge, if you're interested in doing something like this, it really is, although it's a lot of work, it feels very rewarding because it's something different than you normally do. But in this case, I just basically divided the program into the different chants as they come at us in order. So we have a prelude that was built off of Emmanuel, Wisdom, Sapiencia. And in this case, because we were in COVID time and I was only down to my section leaders, we weren't allowed to bring people back for this. I kept it very regular this year. So it was the chant, and then it was the hymn, and then it was an anthem. So this was a little bit even closer to lessons and carols. They're usually not this straightforward. But what I want to focus on actually is how I did a collage-inspired opening. So this is only about 3 minutes long, this opening, but it's a compilation of, it functions a lot like a prelude for a symphony or a prelude for an opera. It's more appropriate for a musical, where the themes of the program will be presented later on. So I opted to use words that were going to be coming later in the program. I started off with Comfort, Comfort, O My People, the hymn, pulled off from there in a melody that was composed to work with the themes and the key that we were working in at the first part of the program. Then we would sing the chant Veni Veni Emmanuel, Captivum Solve Israel, the O Antiphon chant, and then Christ our God to earth descended, which is from Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silence. And then they interpolated that back into the O Antiphon, and then He Comes to Us as One Unknown, which is the anthem. A lot of you may know that text. And then recapping it inside there with the ending of that O Antiphon text. And then finally, the Help Your Fallen People, the translated line from the Marian antiphon for the season of Alma Redemptoris Mater. And so what you hear the singer sing, and it's anchored by a soloist, our tenor soloist, is this collage of different themes that are going to be presented later in the program. So I think, Jessica, we're ready for the YouTube video. This is going to be my church choir in our 2020 O Antiphons, about 3 minutes long. Jessica. So at that time, I was really thinking about meditating on the people that walked in darkness, that from Scripture, Isaiah. So it showed itself in the presentation of this 2020 collage. I was one playing the piano. If you're interested in the nuts and bolts, I was just basically improvising on the same chord, and I wrote music around it that pulled in the words, but then also worked with the theme of the program. Okay, so we're going to take a little pause, give you a little stretch break here as well. One of the things that we'll be looking forward to after this comment section is I'm actually going to do a live a viewing for you to show you the 2022 O Antiphons, and then I'm going to be scrambling around through different music, and it's going to be kind of fun. But what I wanted to ask you here is if you had any questions or comments that you had, and then your food for thought question, thinking about Pope Francis. Is there anything you've heard so far that could foster curiosity, reflection, or courage in your work? So open for your questions if you have any. Yes, a captive audience. Everyone's good. All right. So you want to see how this is going to work then in real time. No worries. Okay. First of all, I did want to just take a second and just, while you can still take your stretch break, you need to go, stand up by all means. But I did want to thank AFPC and NCEA for their hosting today, and these webinars are, I think, a fantastic opportunity to learn and be inspired. One of the things that you should know, I actually took a festival choir to one of the festivals in Houston when I first started teaching. It's a fantastic opportunity for kids to grow in their faith with music that is really high quality in terms of connecting to the wonderful text, wonderful compositional structure. And so I want you to be thinking about checking them out if you're interested in wanting to learn more about their festivals. Go to their websites here. There's still, I think, a schedule for 2023, but that may be coming to the back end of that. And also the 2024 isn't quite up yet, but it's worth going to. In addition to their webinars and their festivals, they really have a care and concern for us to be inspired and to keep growing. So please do think about supporting one of their festivals sometime. It's a wonderful experience, and my kids loved going.
And Rick, we did get a couple of comments, no questions, but you've definitely given the audience a lot to think about. And they really enjoyed the collage idea and the approach of combining scripture and poetry.
Wonderful. Great. All right. So I'm going to take a little pause and actually walk over to my piano. So hang on a second. Hopefully you won't see my cats in the background. But 2022 was an interesting because I wanted to go back to my roots, which there was a poem that Father James had given to me. It was called "There Was a Time" by Father Brainer. I don't know if you know that poem, but we'll kind of look through it a little bit. We won't do the whole thing here, but I will kind of give you an idea of how I was thinking through things. So in this program, I was interpolating a hymn called "Spirit Seeking Light and Beauty." Some of you may know it. It's what the tenor actually sang. There was one line that was missing: "Spirit Seeking Light and Beauty." And this is a hymn that I like going to for Advent. And then the antiphons are interpolated here, and then I have the congregation sing "O Come, Come Emmanuel." And then what's interesting is if you know the Volcom Cabaret songs, there's a song called "Waitin'," which you may or may not know. And again, it's a little bit like the Stevie Nicks song. I don't think anyone would ever think about using it for spiritual type of service, but the text works perfectly. And then I started moving through some anthems that are Advent, usually out of the big the Oxford books for this time of the year. So prayer for the blessing of light. The themes that I picked for this year, I was just wanting to invoke seeking the light and beauty was the idea. So I'll walk you through what happened visually at the beginning of O Antiphons. And then what I was interested in again is the idea of we come out of darkness with Christ entering the world from day into darkness. And so we had a presentation of more of the antiphons. We worked through it, and antiphons that 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 also worked with the anthems that were picked at that point. One interesting point is if you look in the From Day into Darkness section, the Love Bade Me Welcome from the 5 mystical songs, you may not have thought about that being something that would be Advent appropriate, but it actually works really well. And we can talk about that in just a second. And then I wanted to give the congregation just a little bit of a breather. And so we did meditation on messages of peace, where we had some scriptural reading, and then we sang the Mendelssohn, How Lovely Are the Messengers, which was actually a really beautiful balance against the readings. And then I came back to the poem. There was a time, and then I was kind of, by the way, if you have any kind of pitch sensitivity at all, my piano's out of tune, so forgiveness here. But I was improvising at that section in G, and we read more of the poem, and then we went into the Bach Ave Maria as a nod to Mary, more than a nod. Mary is the vessel of Christ. I always try in these programs to always travel through the journey of Mary as the Mother of God. And then we ended it with an interpolation of Madeleine L'Engle's First Coming, it's Advent poems, really interesting, where we would have a reader read the poem, and then we'd sing O Come, O Come Emmanuel, back and forth with the reader. And then the postlude was waiting. We did an excerpt, the choir sang at this time. It was a soloist the first time, and then a choir sang it. And then we were, for the rest of the poem, there was a time, everyone was then walking out as we were singing the rest of O Come, O Come Emmanuel, just oohing on the way out. So what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through this program and kind of show you what I was doing. Okay, so this is how I kind of constructed it. If you're interested in doing something like this, the first thing I like to do is always have sort of what is going to hold the meat of that section together. And in this instance, I was playing with two ideas: Spirit Seeking Light and Beauty, the hymn, which is on the left, and the O Sapientia chant on the right. So the hymn for Spirit Seeking, Spirit seeking light and beauty, heart that longest for thy rest, soul that asketh understand. Only thus can ye be blessed. Through the vastness of creation, though your restless thought may roam, God is all that you can long. God is all. And then I was juxtaposing it with the O Antiphon. I did change the melody just slightly so that it worked melodically. I was hoping none of the Latin chant scholars would kill me too much, but I did change this one a little bit. So on the other half of the coin was O Sapientia, que exore altissimi prodisti, attingens a fine usque ad finem fortite, suaviter disponens quae omni, veni adocendum viam prudentiae. So earlier in my teaching career, probably would have thought, okay, I can, if I were interested in this kind of thing, I might just present it side by side. But the extra challenge, if you choose to accept it, was to see, and was what I did for these programs, is how to integrate them. So what happened is that I chose F for this key. It just worked better for everything. So we have an organist, and so everyone was standing in the back. There was candlelight throughout the chapel, and I would ring a handbell, a hand chime from the back of the church, back of the chapel. And then inside the chapel, the organist would pedal on a low F. And I always liked the idea of coming out of darkness, which is what to me it represented, a feeling of emptiness, solitude. And what happened is that the choir would enter on both sides of the chapel, and they would just hang out in the back. Father Craig, who was our pastor, would read a bit of the poem. There was a time when there was no time, and when darkness reigns as king. And then after he finished that excerpt, the ladies would sing, Spirit seeking light and beauty. And Father Craig would continue, but over the void and over the night, love watched. And then I would cue the trebles, art thou longest for thy rest? And then Father Craig, there was a time when time began. All that asketh understand, only thus can ye be blessed. And so they're humming the whole time. During this point, the men are coming into the back on the other side. And Father Craig says it began when love spoke. And so they sing more of the song. And then as they get to God is all his creatures home, and turn to the other side, and the men, O sapiens, and they would sing the chant. And this whole time the organist would just start riffing a little bit in that key, keeping it open. And so the congregation is starting to feel a sense of presence entering the room. And so we would go that way through the program for that first half. And then what capped it, and to keep the congregation engaged, is that we would all sing the verse of O Come, Emmanuel together, which you see at the bottom of the second page. O come, Emmanuel. And what was really cool about the effect then is that you had handbell from the back, you had organ pedal coming through the chapel, then you have the women's, you had Father Craig seated somewhere. He was using a God mic, so it just sort of came out through the chapel. You had the women from this corner, the men coming singing from this corner, and then finally to conclude that section, the whole congregation sings. So in the first 4 minutes of this sort of transformation, it's not like a concert where we sit and we sing a song and then we clap, or we just sit in silence. It was really kind of an idea that everyone's sort of involved in the waiting, active waiting. And so what happened is that after we got to rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to you, holy. And then we then started into this waiting song, this welcome song. And then the soloist sings, I've been keeps on waiting, but it's someday just like this. And we move on to the program. And so the whole idea for this kind of idea is songs that just sort of come, that people are unexpected about hearing, really can actually have an effect. And everyone has a way into the music. If we sometimes just pick Renaissance motets, there is something interesting about that, of course. And I love chant, and I love going to concerts or to masses where there's all chant, and there's nothing wrong with that, and I love that. But sometimes you also close off people who aren't, that isn't part of their music vocabulary yet. And so this kind of idea is something that helps bring people into the fold. And so just walking you through the rest, we won't do too much more singing. We did interpolate different readings. So the poem would come back, and then the O Antiphons, and then motets. Yeah, it's kind of like, it's pretty involved. It does take a little bit of time to plan it all out. And also at this time too, I was using the whole chapel. So we had the men and women start in the back on both sides, and they would come to the closer to the altar on that side, and they would go on the steps, and they would go away, and a soloist would stay on the altar to sing his solo, waiting. And so if you're up for the challenge, it was really people, again, that one also over 8 years has now just had, a completely full chapel of, and people telling me all the time that my Advent season isn't complete unless I've been to O Antiphons. It really works as an experience. One of the things I do is that it's not an applause. We don't applaud at all for the whole thing. So people come and it's set out in the program, and the music starts, the singers enter in silence, and then they also exit in silence. And so the whole thing is really on the sense of waiting. For this program, I try and balance it like the Sundays of Advent, where there's one Sunday of Gaudete Sunday, and so there's also points of joy, like How Lovely Are the Messengers. That's more of an up anthem. But by and large, I tend to follow the pacing of 1, 2, and 4, which are not so Gaudete. So the feeling of it is a much more calm, contemplative way of looking at Advent musically. And so here's the question that you may have, which is, how can I even possibly apply what you just talked about in this whole presentation to my own work in the classroom or in my own church choir? And I just want to just point you back to those 3 words back at the bottom: curiosity, reflection, and courage. For some of you who are just starting in your careers, by all means, I wouldn't want to tackle this myself either. But there are always elements that you can do to make teaching more interesting, rather than just picking a song and then having the kids sing it. So for example, if you're early elementary, here's one thing you could do if you wanted to use the O Antiphons as a study guide. You could introduce the O Antiphons, you could sing it for them in English, or you could sing it for them in the Latin, and you could introduce the different names for the Messiah and how the O Antiphons present them: Key of David, or Stem of Jesse. And then students can learn about the O Antiphons and how they are used as propers. And then you've introduced another term: what are propers? I know when I grew up in the Catholic Church where I was from, we didn't actually sing the propers, and I hadn't, even though we were using propers, I didn't really even know that's what they were called. So this is again another entry point into a vocabulary of the history of our faith. Another thing is you could cross-reference these names with the singing of the verses in O Come, O Come, Emmanuel, and you say, you know what, kids, you actually know the great O Antiphons. You just didn't know that's what they were drawn from. So another curricular extension you could do is to use their poetic and writing skills by writing a haiku using the names of the Messiah. So Key of David, O Stem of Jesse, 5 syllables there. O Key, I just wrote this one real quick for you. O Key of David, unlock our hearts with your love completely, Jesus. And then you could pull in art ideas, and you can have students look at the O Antiphons and each of the different names and pick pictures, look online or through magazines that could represent what that name of the Messiah means and what it means to them. And you could pair the poems, interpolate, make a PowerPoint and put the poem with the picture. You could present it while they're singing. You could print them, or you could shine them in the narthex as a rolling set of an art gallery for poetry. And so even if things that I've said today just seem like, oh my gosh, I will never do that in my own program, that's so much work. The idea again is about what with Pope Francis says, which is we have to keep using our talents in different ways. Just going through the lectionary cycle ABC and pulling out the same anthems every year isn't exactly the kind of way that we're challenged to use our talents. But let's say that you also don't have an elementary school group, but you're working with middle school, high school. So using the O Antiphons again, I might use that as an opportunity to teach chant notation. I would have students convert, assuming that I've scaffolded them with the learning of theory, I would have them convert neumes to traditional notation. I'd probably show them side by side to see how they can translate it. You could also use solfege or numbers to help them make the leap if that's easier for them. And I would compare the 5-line staff neumes with 5-line musical notes. So again, it's a great skill for teaching what the names of the neumes are, what the symbols mean, what does the swishy, what does that mean in terms of, well, it looks like a big swish, but there's actually notes inside that. For performance, you could emulate something that I had done, and just for one part of your program, and let's just say that the rest of your program is just a stand and deliver of anthem lesson, but let's say for one section, you wanted to try singing the O Antiphon with the hymn, which works well. O sapiencia, O come, Emmanuel. Those songs actually will work together. So you can actually, if you had a church choir, you could have an Advent presentation concert, and that's what you're going to be doing. You can consider poetry or musical sources that are kind of out of the box, but still may have thematic connection to the themes you are presenting. The interplay and discussion that grows from it is the purpose of art. So, for example, when Craig, going back to Conspirare, and he picked that Stevie Nicks song, all of us were like, oh my gosh, Stevie Nicks. I mean, even those of us who have worked with him a while, like, wow, that feels like a stretch, until you're actually in it and you realize, oh, that's actually pretty creative. And when you look at it that way, and you can actually have the discussion, but is it so far off left field? Does the music, does the poetry actually inspire another way of looking at Advent, another way of looking at our faith? All right, so in a nutshell, that's kind of the process of what I'm using for O Antiphons. It's not a form, it's more a way of thinking. It's a way of challenging yourself to think creatively about music, to make it interesting for kids, to make it interesting for adults. And so I hope that something that I've said today has fostered that kind of curiosity or courage to try something new. So I want to go back into that food for thought. If there was anything that you've heard so far that could foster curiosity, reflection, or courage in your work, I'd love to know that. So Jessica, am I turning it back to you?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions that have come up in the Q&A. So one of them being, is there a place where you offer resources or have samples of what you've composed instead of some of them having to compose it on their own?
Yeah, the resource is me. So you could just contact me, which I'll put my email here. I think it's like on the last slide here. But yeah, I'd love to help you. There's nothing really online. Again, like I said, this is a totally creative endeavor on my part. And I'm more than happy to help you. That's actually one of the things I did before I left public school teaching was as a mentor partner with the University of Texas. And so I just love working with people and bouncing off questions. More importantly, the great thing that I'm always going to say is, well, what do you think? And what's moving through you? And then, but yes, you can send me an email, and I'm happy to give you ideas. I'm also happy to send you any of the old programs that I have that you can use as a reference.
Perfect. And then when you were speaking about the elementary and middle school options, we had a couple of questions. One being, do you wait until December 17th to, present this out? When's the planning process look like this?
No, no is the answer,
Mhm.
because unfortunately, as beautiful as that can seem conceptually, what I'm dealing with is families that are hiking out of town. So I'm as much as I think I wanted to, and all hope and like that would be so beautiful. That Monday is usually everyone's gone, so I always backed it up usually to the previous Monday. I know that's a little odd. It was sort of where I would probably do an Advent lessons and carols anyway. But yes, I kind of had to tell people that it's not when it goes, but we're going to do it because all of you are gone.
Perfect. And I believe back on the question regarding choirs and integrating with elementary and middle schools, when you look at this, how many singers do you typically have?
Uh, in general, that choir, my church choir was always about 25 or so, and it could be done with less. I mean, the chants themselves were always in unison. And any kind of things I'd have them do as ooh were typically always geared towards the size of the group and skill of the group. And usually they're just like unison hums and oohs. So the ability to actually elaborate on the style was always geared to who was there. I did it. The excerpt that you actually heard was a quartet. That was 4 people. So it can be done very in a small way. Completely.
Perfect. And then rehearsal, how long does it take you to put it together? What does that look like when you're
Yeah.
working with others?
Yeah, I would probably say if you're going to give it a try, I would, and you don't normally do things this way where it's normally here's our piece of here's our octavo and we're going to sing it on Monday. Like if that's the extent, I would probably back this up a little earlier. Oftentimes, things that you'll be pulling together will be things that you write out in some type of notation software, or writing it out by hand, which is what I've done in past times. When I do movement charts, it's the same thing I used to do for my middle school and high school choirs, is that I would actually have the text like I showed you, but I actually put positioning charts. So I'd have side by side where they're supposed to move. And that was actually much more of an elaborate way of doing it. But I would say you back it up as soon as you can. That doesn't feel super weird that you're starting this Advent at the beginning of the year. So anyways, I think I would start small, but I would back it up probably at least 6 weeks before you start, especially if you're starting with something small. That's typically not too hard. And for most of you, it's probably going to be something musical more than it is moving children around. And that's easy to do, especially if it's part or something. It's much easier to do.
And then they are asking if you would be able to provide contact information for them to reach out and follow up with
I
questions.
will. It's the last slide. Yes, I think, let's see if I can get there. There it is, right there. richardgabrillo@gmail.com. Let me see. Actually, you know what, Jessica, I have some comments here too. So Rebecca, debunking musical snobbery. Yes, this works both directions to meet the styles, both traditional, still being composed now, and contemporary, something over 40 years ago. Absolutely. It's true. You bring to all our minds the close connection between the chant melodies and much of our post-Reformation community in both Roman Catholic and Protestant musical language. Yes, one of the things that it was very interesting, I made it a point to try and pick chant-based masses as part of the church. It was interesting. I went on a limb. It was sort of in my last few years at the church where I really felt very strongly that the music that we were being influenced by doesn't necessarily reflect our Catholic background, but really from sort of the Lutheran side, the Protestant side of the world in terms of the way we approach music. And I had a pitch to my priest, and he actually liked the idea because I kept saying to him, with chant, which is why these O Antiphons I think are very special, because it is something that harkens back to our faith only. I would say to the church that the only sole musical source that we can claim nowadays really is this chant. It comes from within our faith. Everything else is probably going to be influenced from somewhere else, particularly from the Protestant side of approach of music and anthems, etc. And once the church got used to the idea of singing them, and I was inspired when I went to Rome and I was listening to masses there, and the congregations there sing chant with no problems, and it's incredibly beautiful and incredibly solemn. So that's another thing that I was courageous on, because and I got some pushback from congregants, like, I don't know, where's the refrain? I want to tap my foot to the Gloria verse, and it was really interesting that I really had to make a case for the music of our own faith. And I said, but this is why it's important. And I didn't do it the whole year, but that was something that I know I had to kind of wrestle with a little bit. And I think it was successful. Let's see. Sister Mary says, is there something already composed that you could offer us instead of having to compose it ourselves? Yes, Sister Mary, I will help you. I love helping others do something interesting with their music, so absolutely. And I think that might have been it on my side. Jessica, was there anything else on your side?
No, that is all of the questions. So thank you so much for being here and presenting today. We really appreciate having you on the webinar.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our participants. We will be sending out the survey link. So if you could fill that out, we'll get you your certificate of participation. And this webinar will be hosted for you, or hosted on our YouTube channel for you to share out as well. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.